Hi, Ivan.
Hello. I'm so happy now.
Are you?
I'm so happy. This is one of my favorite sessions. I shouldn't be saying this, but this is one of my favorite sessions.
This is gonna be very special, huh?
It's very special because the game we're talking about now is probably the most expected game in 2020, right?
Yeah, there are people that create stories. There are people that are good in creating a good game that you can play again and again. And there are few people that are very talented in creating the whole universe.
Exactly. And one of those is Mike Pondsmith, the creator of the universe of Cyberpunk. That is the universe where that expected game, Cyberpunk 2077, is based on.
Yeah, the most expected game this year.
I would say so. I would say one of the most expected games at least.
Most expected
yeah,
games.
we are all looking forward to get into that universe, explore that universe, be free to live the future. Hopefully a better future than the one that we are living these days.
That we have now.
In this Cyberpunk 2077.
Okay, so do you think that Mike is ready? Do you want to tell something else about him? Or
well, I would say that he's going to speak about the Cyberpunk universe, of course, but we need to remember that Mike has an extensive career in games, doing all kind of games, tabletop games, video games. He's been working in the industry for so many years. So we want to learn from him not only things about the Cyberpunk universe, but also about how he thinks the industry is going right now and where the industry is going. And also about many other things like politics in video games, many other things he usually talks about. It's going to be an exciting session.
Brian Crecente, I don't know if the guys from the technical room can, here we have them. So Brian Crecente, journalist, friend of Gamelab.
Yeah, one of my favorite journalists in the world, as I usually say. Co-founder of Polygon, founder of Kotaku, writing for Rolling Stone, Variety.
Of Rolling Stone, Variety.
All these things. And a very, very good writer. And one of the people that knows more about Cyberpunk, Cyberpunk universe.
I get a really rock and roll vibe about this talk. So I think this is going to be fun.
Yeah, it's going to be fun for sure. Both of them are amazing, and they are waiting. I mean, we are waiting to bring them virtually here to the Gamelab stage, and I guess they are waiting for us to bring them here.
Okay.
Hello, Mike. Hello, Brian.
Thanks, Ivan, for that wonderful introduction. As he mentioned, my name's Brian, and I'm here with Mike Pondsmith. Mike, nice to see you and be with you here virtually. Thanks for coming on this talk.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brian.
So we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff, but before we get into it, I would love to talk a little bit about your history. You have an amazing history in the game industry, not just the video game industry, but the game industry. And you know, it goes back to the fact that you have been working on tabletop games and other sorts of games, including video games, back, I think, since before the 80s, or at least the early 80s. And you're obviously the owner, CEO, and lead designer of our Talsorian Games, RTG. And you've won multiple Origin Awards and also have been introduced into the Origin Awards Hall of Fame. Can you just real quickly walk us through, like, your time, like how you got into game design and how you got to where you are now?
Okay, well, it's a kind of interesting story. For starters, I discovered D&D and all the various tabletop games from another direction. I was originally a naval war gamer, and one of the guys in our naval war game group back in the Bay Area in San Francisco came home from his stint at the Great Lakes Naval Academy, with a copy of the really, really old D&D. And he said, we got to play this. So I got in, and we would play it late at night. And it was kind of amusing because during that time, nobody really played this at all. And one of the people downstairs happened to be a lady of the evening, and she would come home and hear us all at 2 a.m. screaming, "My cleric does this!" So she got curious. So she came upstairs one day, or night rather, and said, "What are you guys doing?" And we explained, and she joined the game. So that was kind of an interesting introduction. So I didn't play for quite a while because obviously we had to wait for my friend to get back from the Great Lakes Naval Academy. But eventually I ran across the woman who was eventually going to be my wife, Lisa, and she gamed. And in fact, she gamed with a guy I'd known way the heck back in college during undergraduate. And in fact, her housemate said, "Yeah, you got to meet this friend of ours, Mike. He games too." So I got into the game that she was in. Kind of a mistake because her boyfriend was running the game at the time, and he wanted my character dead so much you couldn't imagine it. Everybody else would be standing there fighting orcs. I'd be up there in battlements, and a Balrog would show up. "That's one's yours, Mike." "Oh, great. Okay, you don't like me much, do you?" So at any rate, I got into gaming from there. But I wasn't really that much into fantasy. And instead, I was looking for science fiction. And eventually one day in my local game shop, which was also a hardware shop at that time, I walked in, they had a copy of Black Box Traveler. I said, "Oh, that's the game for me." So I immediately glommed onto this, started working on it and playing it, trying things, and found that there were rules that didn't make sense. And I went, wait, we should write it like this. No, we should change it. And I basically began to rewrite Traveler. And that led to my actually doing game design. So cut a little bit further on. I'm now gaming. I'm now playing my rewritten version of Traveler. And at some point I get a job working in, of all things, computer game work. Now, this is way the heck back. We're working on Apple IIes. And the lead designer on it is a guy known probably to most of you as Lord British, or Richard Garriott. And I was like 22 and he was like 17 or 18. So we were, young punks starting out. And the sky was the limit. We had the limits of what you could do with an Apple IIe, but generally there was just untouched ground. We had no idea how to present things, how to set up rules, how to experiment, how to build a consistent world. And I did this for a couple of years and had a great time until the company we were part of folded. So while I was working through that, at one point or another, I took those science fiction rules that I've been messing with. And I said, yeah, I think I'll go do something interesting with them. And I happened to be in a bookstore down in Santa Cruz, California. And there were these books about this Japanese anime called Mobile Suit Gundam. Now, I don't speak Japanese, so I had no idea what the heck I was looking at. But it looked great. 80-foot tall robots storming around in outer space, castles, this, that, the other thing. Yeah, I'm there. So I wrote a game based off of the system I'd written, which was Mechton. It was the first RPG I ever did. And I actually did more as a war game the first time. Started building up the world and all that. And eventually, my girlfriend at that point, now my wife, said, they've got this game convention going on, and one of your heroes, Steve Jackson, inventor of Car Wars, among other things, is going to be there. And I went, Steve Jackson, I can meet him. Okay. So I went to this convention, and I mainly went there to see Steve Jackson. I asked him the immortally stupid question that he has subsequently teased me about for years, which is, Mr. Jackson, what's it like being a game designer? And his response in Steve was, it's a lot like being a science fiction writer, except you don't get the groovies. Okay, I was hooked. So basically what happened was I said, as long as I'm here, I'll show off my robot game, So I had, a slot for a table, and I sat down and I did my robot game. And I had maybe about 6 or 7 people around the table. It was kind of cool, people watching. Wow, they like this. Came back the next day to the second session. There were 40 people around the table. Wow. Okay. And they're like, when are you publishing it? And I'm like, what? Okay. So I ended up publishing Mekton because at the time my job at UC Davis and then later Santa Cruz was running a job shop. And that's a basically internal to the university publishing house. And I had access to really expensive publishing machines. And I had to do practice runs anyway. So did this game, got $500 together from my mother and some friends, turned around and published this game. And next thing I knew, I was suddenly running a game company. So I did Mekton, kept working with that. The next one up was a really weird one called Teenagers from Outer Space, which again was very anime influenced. And by that time we were rolling, and I was down in Santa Cruz, and I picked up a whole crew of really great people, and some of them are still in the business today, as a matter of fact. And we were having a great time. And we go to conventions, and we show stuff off, and we meet people, and it was, I began to realize, yeah, I really kind of like this, and I'm passably good at it. So this led in turn to meeting a lot of the people in the industry, the TSR crew, like Zeb Cook and Jeff Grubb and so forth and so on. And they told us more about how to get it done, how to make a company work. For that, I owe Ray Greer over Hero Games a tremendous debt of gratitude for that, because we didn't go bankrupt the first year. So this led to me doing tabletop. And because my video game company that I'd been part of had crashed by that time, I was doing tabletop and was making money, and I was somehow making a living out of it. And we were, doing pretty good. So at some point, I started thinking about Blade Runner. I'd seen Blade Runner recently, and I'd said, this is like my favorite movie. I got to figure out how to do a Blade Runner RPG. So get down, I start messing around with the ideas and all that. And out of that evolved Cyberpunk. And it was weird because I didn't know much about the genre at that point. I just knew Blade Runner. But as it turned out, Walter John Williams, who's a great science fiction writer and wrote a phenomenally fun book called Hardwired, turned out to be a player of Mekton. And we had a mutual friend who was running the game, and he said, well, if you want to get somebody who knows Cyberpunk in there to kind of give you advice, I got Walter on board, and so I got to meet Walter, or actually talk to him. And he basically gave me a lot of advice, and it changed the nature of how I was doing it from that Blade Runner feeling where it's totally dystopia and you can't win, to that sense you have in Hardwired of you're still a badass and everything's arrayed against you, but you're gonna win. You may not win legally, you may not win cleanly, but you're going to go fight the corporations, or in this case, the orbitals, and you're going to make your mark. You're going to turn it around. And that was a big influence in how I saw the genre at that point. So we do Cyberpunk, and I'm banging it out. And I realized about a month after we announced it that everybody, his brother and his cat, are doing a Cyberpunk game. They've all discovered it. And we were, it's like to always describe it, it's like being on a wave as a surfer. And, you've got this really good wave, and then you're just starting to kick in, and you look behind you, 10 of the best surfers, Laird Hamilton is right behind you. And, he's paddling out with you, and you're going, oh, crap, I'm going to get wiped out. We didn't get wiped out. Instead, we got there firstest with the mostest, and people liked it. And they've kind of liked it for about 35, almost 40 years now. So I went from video game, actually tabletop to video game to tabletop. And as my career, such as it was, progressed, I did more and more of a mix. I would do some video game stuff. I would do some tabletop stuff. I would do tabletop stuff that related to licenses that were more associated with video games. For example, I did some Star Wars stuff way the hell back. And all of that led to essentially a career that seems to have worked, and I haven't had to really work seriously in a long time. So,
well, it's been an amazing breadth of work that you've done. Obviously, one of the things that's getting a lot of attention right now, for a very good reason, is Cyberpunk. CD Projekt Red announced, I guess, in 2012 that they were working with you on Cyberpunk 2077. The original Cyberpunk, for those of you who aren't familiar, came out in '88 and was set in the distant, dark future of 2013, which obviously has come and gone. And then you came up with other iterations of Cyberpunk. You had 2020, which came out in 1990, a 23X, which came out, I guess, in 2005, and then you have Cyberpunk Red, which is that still set to come out this year?
Oh yeah. When I leave you, I'm going back to my keyboard to edit because we're cleaning up the edits right now.
And that game, is that sort of set in between that gap between 23X and 2077?
Well, first of all, 2030X is not part of the canon and timeline. It was an experiment I was doing towards more of a transhuman design. So the result was that there are many things that just don't add up. However, I've always thought of the world that Cyberpunk, the game, is set in as being like a comic. So I saw it as 2013 was like a golden age starting arc. And then the same characters, we came back in 2020 and we said, okay, what are these guys doing 7 years later? And then the idea was that we would continue looking at that. And at about the 2023 period, we organized at Talsorian this enormous war that was going to wreck everything. And by wrecking everything, we could do both a reset, bring in new technology, bring in a couple new villains. So it was basically like a reset in a comic book. But we kept the same characters and we kept the same concepts. We just continued to move the storyline. And in the middle of that, we got contacted by CDPR. And that was an interesting story in itself because I was already working on what will eventually be Red. And my business manager, also my wife, wanders in and she says, we got this letter from these guys in Poland and they're really hot to do a Cyberpunk game. And I'm going, oh. Now, I had been working at Microsoft prior to this, and one of the special areas I worked in was working with outside studios. So I was used to, studios, particularly those who had just come out from the now collapsed Iron Curtain, of being essentially 4 guys and a goat working in like a steamy, hot place in a basement somewhere with a bunch of 2Es, which, considering I had started out that way, was about right. We didn't have a goat, though. Okay, so I was expecting, yeah, all right. And she said, well, they'll pay for you to come out. Why don't you check them out? So I'm used to going over and looking at studios and making assessments. And I'm thinking, yeah, I'll get a trip to Poland. Never been to Poland. This will be interesting. I'll meet the 2 guys and their goat. It'll be cool. And I get there, and this place is insanely good. They have a really sophisticated operation. They're in the middle of doing what will eventually be Witcher 3. And I remember I was sold from the moment I walked in. They said, hey, Mike, we want to show you something. And they were showing me a hillside. And they said, we have weather now, which will cover the entire period, depending on when you come in. And I watched as by keystrokes, they would propagate not just the changes in the weather in the forest, like from spring to fall to winter, but game trails moved and stuff happened. They had worked out how to do a really, really clean system that not only was able to self-generate itself, but was also able to do that in an intelligent way. And I went, whoa, these guys are good. Okay. So it also turned out that they were Cyberpunk fans. we had many years earlier done a version of Cyberpunk for Polish. And I remember, Lisa saying, yeah, we're going to, license these guys in Poland to do it. And I said, well, that'll be about 5 people, who's going to be reading this in Polish, right? Because remember, at that point, the Iron Curtain was still up. And it turned out that, as one of my friends over there says, well, we had Cyberpunk and we had communism. And I said, thank you for choosing Cyberpunk. So basically, yeah.
No, I was just going to say, I was just going to say that it's interesting because, obviously Witcher is the byproduct of a written work, and you have this history of taking things that are IP and sort of transmuting them between different types of properties, taking something that's tabletop and making it a game, or taking something that's, a book and turning it into a tabletop, or anime and turning it into a tabletop.
Like Dragon Ball.
Were you exactly? So were you? Was that something that appealed to you because you knew what that was like to do when you were watching them do this with The Witcher?
Yeah. Remember, I'd been working at that point like 8 or 9 years directly in video games. I'd been part of Microsoft Games. I'd been part of a company called Monolith. I had been doing freelance stuff. So I was pretty adept at, understanding computer game stuff. So it wasn't like I was walking in as a typical person who has an IP and going, wow. I was going, how are they going to actually implement this? How can they do this? Plus, I had been part of Matrix Online, so I knew how hard it was. Not very easy at all. And I'd been part of an ill-fated project out of Singapore, which involved some of my old staffers, to do a Cyberpunk game way the heck back in like the 80s/90s. So I knew it wasn't easy, and I knew it was going to be very difficult, and a lot of it was not going to be procedurally generated. A lot of it was going to be extremely complex. But like I said, I had 2 advantages. One is these guys were good. They cared. They had their own engine. They had spent time working on making that engine capable of doing anything they wanted. And on top of it, they were fans. So I didn't have to go through what I had done with many of the other people over the years who had licensed Cyberpunk and didn't understand it. They go, oh, okay, Cyberpunk, then we'll reskin it and we'll call it this. Or, we'll call it Cyberpunk, but it won't be anything like what you described. These guys are going, from the moment I walked in, well, let's see, we have to have Johnny Silverhand in alt because that's a really great romantic thing going on. And he represents, and I'm going, these guys know this stuff better than I know. So I came back from Poland and I said to Lisa, yeah, give them the job because they can do it and they care. They really want to do the game that I would do. And I think to their surprise, they didn't know about the last 10, 12 years of my working in digital. So suddenly they realized they had somebody who could actually make intelligent comments instead of just a guy sitting on a license. I could look at something and go, okay, so how are you going to do this? How are you going to implement that? And so it became more of a collaborative process than I think normally happens in this kind of license situation. I could look at something and go, okay, so this is really cool and this is important, but that's not going to work. It's going to be too hard. The result was the collaboration gave us something that felt like both the world that we were basing off of, but also had been adapted in a way where it could be implemented in a video game format. And that's really important. Sometimes you just can't pick it up and say, hey, I'm going to just like, it was done over here in the movie or the book or whatever. You have to look at the medium and go, yeah, this has different constraints. And all of us at the team approached that, and it became more of a, I wouldn't say family, although a lot of the guys over there are just like family. I get notes. We send stuff to their kids when they're born. It's pretty close, but we see a lot of the same things, and there's a shared goal.
It's interesting, when you talk about this, I'm assuming that not only did they have to understand you and your games and the narrative fiction interweaved into those games, but also they had to have an understanding of what Cyberpunk is, which I'd love to hear your thoughts. Yeah. I mean, as you mentioned, Cyberpunk's been around for a while. I think it sort of was born out of the 60s and 70s, some movements there in science fiction. What, in your mind, how would you define what Cyberpunk is?
It's interesting because I think it's evolved. I think that it is not just, violet and blue lights and rain streets. That's kind of a setting, but it can be anywhere. It can be in any environment. It is at core about a world where the forces of capitalism, the forces of government, basically people more powerful than you, are shaping and making the world to their own ends, but they're not necessarily your ends. They're not essentially what you want or see for your future and your descendants' future. So you're alone. But the thing is, technology cuts both ways. The great William Gibson, at one point said, the street finds its uses for things, and he's dead on right, is that you might have a computer and the government might have a computer, but what you do with that computer may be very different than what the government both does or wants you to do. So It's about people leveraging a ubiquitous technology against these forces that are arrayed against them, that are incredibly powerful in shaping a world that works for them but doesn't work for you. Where I think we brought the change to the party was that what we looked at in Cyberpunk was a little different than the genre had been before, which was basically people who, in the end, fought but could not win. Right. Case in point, I love Blade Runner. I think I have every version of Blade Runner out there. But I realized, Deckard basically is a pawn in the game. And my hero actually in there is Roy Batty, because Roy Batty at least says, okay, I'm going to go up against what they've set up, where I'm a machine, I'm used, corporations use me, governments allow them to use me, I'm sent to war whether anybody asks me or not, my life is controlled by these enormous forces living in gigantic pyramids, and he decides to fight it. And what we brought to the table was the idea that if you were fast enough and smart enough, you could lead revolution. You could get out there and not necessarily go to the streets, but you could hack the systems. You could shut down evil projects. You could find out where you were being exposed to horrible things and get rid of them. You could basically have an effect in your universe. You could become the hero. But the important part in Cyberpunk is you're never the hero. You're a little hero. You're not a great big damn hero. You're a little hero. And it's personal. And the best Cyberpunk is about people who are dealing with a personal battle that is affected by these forces arrayed against them. And because it's personal, it involves neighborhoods, it involves connections, it involves history, it involves cultures. All of these things come together in this battle to basically preserve one's life and worldview. And I think one reason Cyberpunk is making this massive comeback isn't just because CD is doing a phenomenally cool game, but I think a lot of people feel right now that this is one of the problems of the world we're in. They look at the economic situations. They look at, how our governments operate. They look at things and they go, I'm disempowered. And then they start thinking, well, what is the street giving me to work against that? All of a sudden you go, yeah, I can hack this corporate website. I can expose this evil plan. I can set situations where millions of people scattered across the globe can unite and gather both information and set agendas of their own. So I think that's one reason Cyberpunk is making a comeback, because we need Cyberpunk.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because there is this, I think, my feeling is that there is this idea of, and the sort of the thing that leads to the dystopian cyberpunk world is this sort of upheaval of social norms and ready availability of technology. And that's what we're seeing right now, like both those things. I think what's fascinating about what you're talking about with your take on Cyberpunk and Cyberpunk with a capital C, your game, is this notion that it's a little, maybe I'm wrong, but it sounds to me like it's a little less nihilistic than what you find in traditional Cyberpunk. So there is this idea that, I mean, like you said, I love Blade Runner too, but it's a bummer. You watch Blade Runner and you're like, oh, this is not going to end well. It can't end well. It's not allowed to end well. So do you feel like
it's supposed to make you feel, you're supposed to feel like you can't win against it, so that you feel depressed and then you get enraged about that.
Right.
You realize that you're being held down.
So I know you've talked a little bit about political themes and politics in video games and tabletop games. I would assume, from what I've read of what you've said and just the themes of Cyberpunk, that you're not a creator who feels like politics shouldn't be in video games or in games. What is your feeling on that?
Well, I'm probably going to enrage people on both sides of the aisle by this, but no, games are literature, games are art, and art, literature, whatever you make it, are inherently political. Shortly after we invented weapons and prostitution, we invented basically politics, because then we had to organize everything around getting more weapons, more prostitution, I guess, to paraphrase an old Heinleiniism. But the point is, man is an inherently political animal, and we organize our societies to work for people on top, or hopefully people throughout a society. And if you say there isn't a political situation involved in art, you're essentially kidding yourself. I think it's always there. That being said, what we have a tendency to do now is to say, it's not political unless it's my particular politics. And that's part of the problem, is people see it as a tool or a weapon to be used with or against their own personal beliefs. I tend to look at it as freedom is important, not just from the area of the people involved, but in a society or indeed a civilization. Freedom allows a civilization to get checks, balances, to grow, to learn from its mistakes. And that's part of the foundational part I see of politics in a game. But along with that, I've also said in print that if you want someone to see your POV, you really have to stop preaching. When you preach at people and they don't find it out themselves, what happens invariably is they shut down, because you're now threatening what they see the world as. You're saying you're wrong, and my way is right. You may not be right, or you may only be partially right. And that's where you need to basically be able to talk to other people and find out what's right for a lot of people. If you preach, you don't get there. You've just basically given your side of the statement, and now you're waiting to convert somebody. People don't seem to work that way, So what I've believed is that when you do politics in a game, it should be something that occurs in a game, but does not necessarily have a visible agenda. At no point does anybody in a Cyberpunk game come up and go, you should follow this belief structure. What they're saying is, you're in a bad situation here. This is a world that is not designed to promote your life and livelihood and your friends and your neighborhoods and everything that you care about. How you deal with that is not necessarily going to be tied to one set of political viewpoints. You may have to change tools halfway through, but it's going to be political. You're making a decision, and that decision should be informed. You need to know what you're up against, and you need to know what you want to get at the end. Every mega corporation in Cyberpunk has a goal, and it isn't like they just said, I got up in the morning and I decided I was going to be evil. No, they have reasons for doing what they think they want to do. They just don't happen to be your reasons. but you might be able to find a place where you can make your reasons and their reasons coexist, or even have your reasons supplant their reasons if they can see a good reason to do that. If they can look up and go, maybe I need to cut down the fossil fuels because we're going to run out of them sooner or later, or, this is happening or that is happening. And instead of saying it's bad, you go, there's probably a better way to do this. And you want to make money and I want to be able to breathe. Let's talk about that.
Right. Do you think, I think I saw something attributed to your company. I'm assuming it comes from you, but it's an interesting thought that Cyberpunk wasn't meant to be aspirational, that it's a warning. Do you think that people, is that do you think people don't realize that? Do you think there are people out there who think that, wouldn't it be cool to live in the world of Blade Runner?
I think that they need to be reminded sometimes that along with that, there are two things that happen. The first one is you may not be Roy Batty. In a cyberpunk world, you may be that guy who is eating out of the trash can when Deckard goes out to his car in the rain. You may not be on top. And this always cracks me up when I see people talking about, their post-Holocaust fantasy. They're going to get all their guns. They're going to get their road warrior car. And they're going to be going, what makes you think you're going to have any of that? Why do you think you're going to be on top? What did somebody come down from the sky and say, hey, you now will be the new Mad Max? No. So your aspirations need to be balanced. You need to say, yeah, this is real. Second, most people don't in our society yet have an idea of how lousy it would be to be in a place where getting a bucket of ground grain scop with some, proto yeast in it for breakfast every day would be. They have this fantasy of how it operates rather than what that day-to-day is. And so, as I like to joke, I like going to Starbucks way too much to want to have, total post-Holocaust behind me. I'd like to not have to fight my way down to the local store with, guns blazing. I kind of like that.
Right.
That's why we have a civilization. Okay. So you don't, if you really think about it, want to have that, but you should know it's possible. You should know that it could happen precisely because you want to know how it gets there and how you're going to fight to make sure it doesn't go down that way. And so, again, it's aspirational would be a bad idea. You don't want to be Mad Max because Mad Max's life sucked, basically. You don't want to be Roy Batty. What you want to be is the guy who follows in all of the prequel animes that were done for the new Blade Runner, where, you're basically saying, okay, we're going to wreck the system so we can't be traced. We're going to give all those people who are replicants freedom, and we're going to see what they can do with it because the system needs them as slaves, but they deserve to be people and be free. So, wrapping that up, I see Cyberpunk as a warning. I see it as something that says, if you really think this is a good idea, I want you to think about what that means, how it really affects you, how you're going to deal with it. If you really think this is a good idea, I suggest you go talk to people in Beirut or Sarajevo or any number of places where it is damn near Blade Runner, where, people are shooting each other and laying waste to their cities and people are cringing in the ruins. That's not a movie. That's life. Now, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah. Do you, that brings up an interesting point. You're obviously working on helping with Cyberpunk 2077, but working on Cyberpunk Red. and you're, I'm assuming, working on some of the sort of narrative hooks in there while the world is falling apart. I mean, there's so much going on right now. There's so much upheaval, sort of upheaval that you might think could lead to a dystopian future. So how do you balance that? How do you do that while this is going on?
Dystopian future? Could lead to a dystopian future?
Yeah, you're right.
Hey, look out the door. Yeah, I love it. My wife was at Gamma, and she came back from Reno. She came back from Reno, and it was just the beginning of the entire COVID-19 thing. And I said, it's not going to affect us. We're way the heck out here in Seattle. Nobody. Turns out that Life Care is 2 miles from my house. Ooh, so right. It's like, okay, yeah, it's going to affect you because it's a world, and it's a world where anybody can be anywhere and can affect a lot of things. Yeah, it's an interesting problem because you really have to think about the world you're going to get, and you have to think about all the things that could go wrong. One of the fun things that we did in Red, and I'm having a great time with it now, is we asked, would you end up with Mad Max after a global war? So I spent a ridiculous amount of time studying World War II and World War I, which was a lot worse than World War II in a lot of ways, and looking at how did society survive after something that big, something, your entire, I was watching last night, and they're showing pictures of Tokyo, and Tokyo wasn't even hit by a nuke. But you're looking at it, you're going, this is the largest city on Earth, and it was like obliterated all the way across the Kanto Plain with fire bombs. And you're thinking, there are now millions of people who have to find a way to live through that, okay? So when you're thinking about a post-Holocaust situation, you need to think about how does it really play out. So I was fascinated by it because I realized something really cool. There's a wonderful book called 90% of Everything, which is about how we transship stuff using cargo containers. Those big boxes you see on the back of the trucks, in the back of the trains, and occasionally you see them being loaded onto ships and so forth. That changed how we do everything. Everything we have is now mass produced, and the elements are moved around the globe in staggering amounts. So I realized something. If you had that kind of productivity, then you weren't going to necessarily have Mad Max. You're going to have this weird fusion of some of it Mad Max and some of it not. For example, you wouldn't get new cell phones if all the cell phone companies were obliterated, but you would still have cell phones because at any given point in the last 10 years or more, there are over 1 billion cell phones out there. Maybe you may not find the brand you want, although the odds are probably pretty good, but you're going to be able to get a bloody cell phone. So the question becomes, how do I get service? Not can I get technology? Technology is going to be really ubiquitous. And it now becomes, how do I get stability? How do I get infrastructure? And Red examines that. Red says, okay, after a war that was really horrendous and ended with a nuclear attack on an American city, where did we go from there? How do we recover? How do we get from this wreckage that was brought on by our corporate overlords to something we can live in? And the fun part is when I hooked up a CD, we kicked this around quite a bit. And we finally realized that it was kind of a cool thing to have Red progress that storyline to lead to 77. There's a really great poster series that CD's done that show the different ages as they see it of Cyberpunk. And, we're in basically the one with the, as I like to call it, the sitcom version with the brother standing there and, the girl next to him with the cyber arms and all bit, i.e. a reconstruction period. Although it always looks like a sitcom to me for some reason, I don't know why. But the upshot is, come on, Gold and his friends, at any rate. The upshot is cultures rebuild. Even after the Bronze Age collapsed, people, everything in mankind had gone to hell. People didn't even remember how to make bronze at this point. And yet they built it. It took 300 years, but they built it. And it's not going to take that long in our kind of society because there's a billion libraries out there. There's a billion, photographic records. There's information which, if you can get to it, will tell you how to do everything from build a nuclear power plant to, raising hydroponic food. But finding it, putting it back together again, rebuilding it, so that you eventually end up in the world that 2077 is about, which is, we put it back together and this is what it's like. But by the way, all those guys who caused the problem in the first place, they're still around. There's a point why Militech and Arasaka are around in 77. It's to show that you knock evil back and eventually it comes crawling back out of the woodwork. So you better make sure you're prepared about that.
There's so much we could talk about. I have one more question before we run out of time. I am curious about, and we talked a little bit about just now about Cyberpunk Red. So that's you sort of struggling with the idea of like what's in the near future. Cyberpunk 2077 is obviously, you just alluded to some of what it's going to be talking about, but that's a distant future. So is it still dystopian, or is it, as you said, it sounds like it's maybe a little less dystopian than what might be in Red? Like how do those two sort of compare?
Red is more post-Holocaust. It's the difference between everything's gone to hell or everything's better, but to get there you kind of had to sell out. So Red is much more about survival and putting it back together with the tools you have, with the hope that the result will be a better result. Where 77 is, we put it back together again, but the problems that created Red are still there. And you're going to always be fighting. There's always going to be greedy, evil, corrupt, crazy, nasty people out there. There are going to be corporations designed for the aggrandizement of equally nasty and horrible people. They will be there. You don't get to say at the end of it, well, Frodo, he threw the ring in that big pit over there and no one's going to make another ring. No, someone's going to make another ring. Someone's going to remember that there was a ring of power and they're going to go, damn, if I had gotten the ring of power, I would have been smarter than Sauron. Yeah. So
it's more, you think 2077 is more about systemic than about sort of rebuilding?
Yeah, we've rebuilt. Now what we have to do is, for example, if it's glitzy and beautiful and everything else like that, where's the corruption now? It's obvious in Red that, you're dealing with supply, demand, wreckage, culture shift, all that, where, people have kind of missed the fact. They're kind of going, well, like, there's all this exploitive stuff going on in Cyberpunk, 2077. I'm going, that's the point. It's about how you're being exploited.
Right.
One of the ones I always love is, how we got beer ads and trucks to mean masculinity in America, and I lived to a point where that wasn't masculinity. And then I watched beer guys and truck guys going, you get in your truck, your enormous truck, and you drink beer. And I'm going, somebody just sold you that. Somebody just manipulated reality. Somebody basically was messing with you. They are essentially, when you get down to it, exploiting you. And think about it. How many celebrities do we follow right now where their only purpose is to be celebrities? At some point, a celebrity used to be somebody who had done something, where now you can be a celebrity just because you basically were a celebrity and someone said, they're a celebrity. We created them. And so a lot about 77 is about the exploitation that is the soft cover to the iron fist of corporations, of companies, of people in power. Basically, We'll send teams out to destroy your livelihood. But in the meantime, we came up with a really great new flavor of GAC that you're really going to enjoy. So you're busy, hey, this stuff's great. You forget the fact that the ninjas are coming into the window to kill you. So,
it's like Brando is the thirst mutilator.
Brando, I love Idiocracy because it nails it.
Right.
And it nails the fact that, at that point in Idiocracy, what's wonderful about it is that they don't even realize how they got there. And, Judge Hurt's character is kind of looking around going, oh my God, so over here we started with this and now, oh man, why didn't we get rid of that back there?
Well, thank you so much.
There's a difference.
Thank you so much for doing this. It's been fascinating. I'm sure we could talk for another hour, but I think we're out of time.
Yeah. I don't know when to shut up.
And I don't want you to shut up. That's the problem. So Ivan, thank you for hosting us and Gamelab Barcelona. This has been really fascinating, and hopefully maybe we can do this again sometime.
Thank you so much, Mike and Brian. It's been amazing listening to you. We could be hours and hours listening to this conversation and many more from you two guys. We are so looking forward to get in depth into that universe, both in the video game and in the role-playing game, in the tabletop game. And hopefully we can have you together at some point soon here at Gamelab Barcelona. Thank you so much and see you soon.